Once the light of every room, Leela hadn't walked or smiled in over a year, until a stranger walked into her silence. The sun was warm on the garden paths of the exclusive rehabilitation center, where well-manicured hedges lined the walkways, and fountains danced in the distance. Children with therapists played on padded grass, some throwing colorful balls, others drawing chalk butterflies on the pavement. But 8-year-old Leela Reeves sat apart from it, all still and silent in a sleek, custom-made wheelchair. She wore a pale blue dress, the kind that once twirled with laughter, now motionless. Her brown curls fell messily over her shoulders, untouched by the breeze. Her hands rested in her lap, limp. Her eyes, once bright, were dulled by months of therapy sessions, unanswered questions, and empty encouragement. A few feet away stood her father, Colton Reeves, the famously unshakable tech CEO whose inventions were changing the world, but who couldn't find the words to reach his own daughter. He paced with his phone pressed tight against his ear, juggling a crisis at his company. His voice sharp, distant, rehearsed. He didn't see how Leela's eyes briefly followed a little boy racing by on prosthetic legs. He didn't hear the soft sigh she gave when a girl in braces stood for the first time, and he didn't notice the quiet tear that slipped down her cheek and disappeared into the folds of her dress. Leela had been in that chair for 13 months. An accident no one wanted to talk about, a spinal injury they said might never heal. She had stopped speaking soon after. Nothing helped. Not the top specialists, not the imported equipment, not even the endless stream of well-meaning therapists. Mr. Reeves paid for everything except hope. That was the day Jake Miller arrived. He didn't walk like the others. No clipboard, no lab coat, just a weathered duffel bag and a softness in his step. A former Army medic turned part-time caregiver, Jake had applied, on a whim. On paper, he didn't qualify for a center like this, but he came with a different kind of experience, one born from nights spent helping his own daughter relearn how to move after a car crash took her mother and nearly took her legs. When Jake walked into the garden, he didn't head for the main desk. He stopped in front of Leela, crouched low, and looked her in the eyes. Not like a patient, like a person. Hey, he said softly. I'm Jake. I used to know a little girl who sat just like that. She didn't think she'd ever dance again. But you know what? One day she kicked me right in the shin. Leela said nothing. She didn't move. But her eyes met his. Just for a moment. From the window. Mr. Reeves saw it the smallest shift. Leela blinked, looked up, a flicker of something he hadn't seen in a year. He hung up the call. Over the next few days, Jake wasn't assigned to Leela, but he showed up. Not with charts or plans, but with stories, with songs, with clumsy funny dances that made Leela's lip twitch upward once. Then again, he brought his daughter Maddie to visit, who didn't talk to Leela like she was broken. She sat beside her and handed her a paintbrush. Little by little, the silence cracked. A soft giggle, a hand lifted, a foot tapped. Leela began to respond onto instructions, but to presence, to care. Jake didn't try to fix her. He believed in her, and she could feel it. The garden was the same, the sun still warm, but something had changed. For the first time in over a year, Leela smiled. The walls of Colton Reeves' corporate office were made of glass and steel, sharp, cold, and intimidating, just like the man himself. Floor 2 ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, while a silent digital assistant scrolled real-time market data across a nearby wall. A place built for decisions, not emotions. Jake Miller sat on the other side of the obsidian desk, wearing a simple button-up shirt and worn-in boots that didn't match the leather and chrome surroundings. He looked out of place. He felt it too, but he sat tall, even as the silence stretched between him and the most powerful man in the building. Mr. Reeves glanced at the resume in front of him, eyebrows lifting slightly in mild disbelief. You're not licensed. You haven't worked in a facility of this caliber. You're not a child therapist, a doctor, or a specialist. Jake gave a small nod. That's true. Then help me understand why you think you belong here. Jake leaned forward, his voice calm, but weighted with something deeper than qualifications. Because I know what it's like to raise a daughter who was broken, and watch her heal. Not through money, not through machines, but through love, patience, and showing up when it's hardest. Mr. Reeves blinked, unimpressed. That's not therapy. That's parenting. Jake met his gaze steadily. Sometimes, that's all a child needs. Someone who doesn't walk away when they're quiet. Someone who waits. Mr. Reeves exhaled sharply and stood, ready to end the meeting. We don't take risks with children like mine, Mr. Miller, especially not emotional ones. I'm sorry. Then came the knock, soft, hesitant, and impossibly timed. The door cracked open. Lila peeked in, her wheelchair barely visible behind the frame. The nurse pushed her gently inside. Unaware of the conversation unfolding, Jake's eyes softened the second he saw her. Lila's gaze swept across the room past the shelves of trophies, past her father's stiff posture until it landed on Jake. Her expression didn't change much, but her fingers twitched. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached out her hand, toward him. Mr. Reeves froze. It was the first voluntary motion she had made toward anyone in weeks. Jake didn't say a word. He stood, stepped forward, and knelt beside her. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just laid her small hand into his. Calloused one. Mr. Reeves's voice faltered as he looked at the man in front of his daughter. No degree, no suit, no prestige, but something more rare. Connection. He cleared his throat and said quietly, "When can you start?" The physical therapy room had never felt so alive. Morning sun spilled across the floor, casting warm golden patches where mats, balance bars, and therapy balls sat waiting. But it wasn't the equipment that made the room feel different, it was Jake. He wasn't like the others. He didn't clock in, run drills, and write reports. He walked in like a dad coming home. He knelt beside Lila's wheelchair with a grin, a goofy joke, and sometimes a stuffed giraffe tucked under his arm, claiming it needed therapy to "All right, Miss Lila," he'd say, placing a tiny beanbag on her lap. "Let's see if your knees are still as ticklish as last week." Lila didn't talk, not yet, but her smile had returned, small at first, like a secret, then more freely. Her shoulders were less hunched. Her fingers moved more. Every day, Jake brought not just exercises but imagination, a race car lap on wheels, a treasure hunt using only pointing a ball toss where the ball only obeyed princesses. Then there was Medijek's 10-year-old daughter. She wasn't supposed to be part of therapy, but after one accidental visit, she became part of Lila's world. Unlike adults who hovered or coddled, Maddie simply played. She held Lila's hand like it was normal. She painted pictures and told stories about dragons who couldn't walk until they believed they could fly. Together, they made Lila feel like more than her chair, like she was still a child, a sister, a friend. One particular afternoon, the room was quiet except for the soft chirping of birds outside the windows. Jake sat across from Lila, a small therapy ball between them. She was supposed to push it with her foot, but her leg had barely moved in weeks. "All right," Jake said gently. "Last round you beat me twice today. You think you can win again?" Lila stared at the ball, eyes focused. Jake waited, not pressuring, not rushing, just believing. Then something shifted. Lila leaned forward, ever so slightly. Her fingers gripped the sides of the chair. And then barely audible she whispered a word that hung in the air like a miracle. Push. Jake froze. He looked at her, his eyes wide, his voice caught in his throat. "What did you say, sweetheart?" She met his gaze, her lips trembling, and this time a little louder. "Push." Jake felt the sting in his eyes before he could stop it. He wasn't supposed to cry here. He was the strong one, the helper, the steady hand. But in that moment, watching her foot twitch and the ball roll just a few inches, he let the tears fall. From the observation window, Mr. Reeves had come early to check on the session. He saw it happen. The word, the motion, the man who kneeled beside his daughter like it was the most sacred job in the world. And for the first time, he understood healing wasn't always clinical. Sometimes, it was just someone believing in your child enough to wait for a single, whispered word. The garden was alive with color and laughter. Strings of pastel balloons swayed in the breeze, and white tents shaded tables covered in cake, juice boxes, and tiny party hats. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows over. A crowd of family therapists and staff all gathered to celebrate a moment no one had dared to hope for just weeks earlier. It was Lila's 8th birthday, but more than that, it was her return. The guests stood in a semicircle near the flower-lined path, phones ready, voices hushed. At the end of the walkway stood Mr. Reeves, straight-backed and anxious, his arms open. "Take your time, baby girl," Jake whispered behind her. Lila stood on trembling legs, braces hidden beneath a yellow sundress that fluttered around her. knees. Her eyes were wide but steady. Maddie gave her a thumbs up from the side, holding back tears. Jake was right behind her, not touching, just their silent strength. And then she moved. One step wobbly. Another, more sure. The crowd gasped. Mr. Reeves covered his mouth, overwhelmed. Lila took one final step and collapsed into her father's arms. He caught her, held her like he'd never let go again. Tears streamed freely down his face as she whispered something into his chest. Something only he could hear. Cheers erupted. Balloons were released. Jake stood at the edge of it all, quietly, wiping a tear, letting the joy belong to her and her dad. Later that evening, when most of the guests had gone and the sky turned pink with sunset, Mr. Reeves found Jake sitting on a bench with Maddie asleep on his shoulder. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice still raw. You didn't just help my daughter walk, you gave her life back. Jake gave a soft smile. She did the hard part. I just showed up. Mr. Reeves pulled an envelope from his jacket. I want you on my team, Director of Family Wellness. We'll build a program around what you did. You'll have full support, 6 figures, benefits, anything you need. Jake looked down at the envelope, then at his sleeping daughter, then back up. I'm honored, he said gently. But, I have to say no. Mr. Reeves blinked. What? Why? Jake shifted slightly, speaking with quiet conviction. I didn't help Leela for a job. I helped her because I saw a little girl who reminded me of mine, sitting in silence, and I knew I couldn't walk away. Mr. Reeves stared at him, struggling to understand. Jake continued, some things you do because they matter. That's enough. He stood, lifted Maddie carefully, and nodded with the warmth of a friend, not an employee. You've got her now, Jake said. Just keep showing up. And with that, he walked off into the dusk, leaving behind more than just footprints. He left hope. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the community park. Trees rustled in the soft breeze, and the grass shimmered under its warmth. Children ran freely, their laughter mixing with the chirping of birds and distant sounds of a carousel winding down. On a quiet hill beneath an old oak tree, a picnic blanket lay stretched across the grass. Sandwiches, half-eaten juice boxes, tipped sideways, and a spilled container of strawberries told the story of a joyful mess. Leela was no longer in her wheelchair. She was on her feet, racing after Maddie with unfiltered laughter that echoed through the open space. Maddie darted behind a tree, giggling. Lila followed, running slower but stronger with every step, her hair flying behind her like it was chasing the wind. Jake sat on the blanket, leaning back on his elbows, watching them with soft eyes. Mr. Reeves sat beside him, no longer in a suit, but in a sweater and jeans. Something about him relaxed, almost unfamiliar. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a dad. They watched in silence for a moment. Then Mr. Reeves spoke. I used to think I could fix everything, he said quietly. That if I just paid enough, controlled enough, planned enough, I could make her whole again. Jake glanced at him but didn't interrupt. But I couldn't, Mr. Reeves continued. And then you came along, with nothing to prove, nothing to gain. You didn't just help her move again, you helped her live again. Jake looked out at the girls. She just needed someone who believed she wasn't broken. There was a pause, filled only by the girls' laughter echoing across the field. Then, Mr. Reeves turned to him not as a businessman, not as a client, but as a man who had been humbled by grace. I know we're not family by blood, Jake, but I think we are by something else. Jake nodded. Yeah, I think so too. Lila and Maddie ran back toward them, cheeks flushed, arms open. They collapsed onto the blanket, laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. Maddie leaned her head against Jake's shoulder. Lila curled up beside her dad, who kissed the top of her head without a word. As the sun dipped lower and painted the world in amber light, a quiet peace settled over them all, not the kind that comes from answers, but the kind that follows healing. And in that stillness, a single thought lingered in the air, unspoken but deeply understood. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from hospitals or machines. It comes from someone simply saying, let me help.